All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We might have some folks join midstream. And as always, we are going to record this session and send it out. So if you miss anything, you'll have a chance to rewatch it. Really pleased to have back with us one of our adjunct professors in the program, Jeff Biller. Jeff's full-time job is as an assistant professor of cyber law and policy at the United States Air Force Academy in the CyberWorks program. Jeff and I met many years ago now as I was building this program. We were on a panel together out in Colorado Springs, and I asked him, hey, you wouldn't be able to teach for another institution, could you? And he said, well, let me ask. And happily, the answer was yes from the Air Force Academy. So Jeff is one of several of our real superstar adjunct faculty and brings us specific expertise on the national security and policy side of things. And that's part of what we're going to get into today is Jeff's course that we probably a little too generically label cyber law, and maybe we ought to think about renaming that. But I forgot, for those of you who don't know me, to introduce myself, Brian Ray. I am, among other things, the Associate Dean for, it's actually Faculty Development and Online Programs. I also direct and and founded this master's program, as well as this Interdisciplinary Center for Cybersecurity and Privacy at Cleveland State University College of Law. So what we'll do today is turn now to a conversation with Jeff about his background in the field. He is a lawyer, as well as a former member of the Air Force. Talk about that intersection and why it's so important, regardless of where you intersect with cybersecurity, because inevitably at some point or another, cybersecurity issues intersect with national security, and almost every cyber attack, not every, but almost every cyber attack has some international law dimensions to it. And then get his perspective on the program and why different roles in cybersecurity could benefit from the specific program that we offer. And then we'll have some time for Q&A with Jeff. I'll let him go, and we'll do a quick overview of the program itself and the application process. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck and turn to Jeff. And by the way, if you have questions throughout, feel free to pop them in the Q&A, which I will try to monitor periodically, or do it in the Q&A is probably the easiest thing. That way I can keep track of them. Or feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to call on you, but the Q&A I'll definitely be monitoring. All right, so Jeff, tell us a little bit about, or more than a little bit, about how you got involved into cybersecurity and a little bit about your history in this field.
Sure. I'll try not to go too long on this part so that we can leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But so as often happens, a little bit accidental. So for a long time, I was a lawyer in the Air Force, but before that, I was an intelligence officer, and heavily involved in areas of signals intelligence, which, if we go back far enough in kind of the cyber spectrum, one of the primary ways for a long time that states interacted was using cyber as an intelligence gathering method. Obviously, we saw the Chinese do that to great effect for well over a decade. So I was very much involved kind of in that aspect of cyber from an intelligence side before the Air Force was kind enough to send me off to get a law degree. So when I came back, most young lawyers in the military begin as prosecutors. I found myself kind of very drawn to computer crimes cases and was a prosecutor for a number of those cases. I just found the not just the criminal aspect of how they conduct the crimes, but also the investigative aspects and advising law enforcement on how to do an investigation into computer crimes, because there's a lot of very interesting, difficult issues with evidence gathering, evidence
Right.
presentation, presenting evidence at trial on the computer side. And so I told the Air Force, hey, I think this the cyber computer crimes kind of thing is really fascinating, but it's also very difficult. I'd like to continue doing that. And they said, well, why don't we send you to get a advanced legal degree, an LLM, that focuses in on cyber issues, particularly from the national security side, but also from the computer crimes and investigation side. So which was nice because I kind of got abroad from the very beginning. I had a peek into the national security and intelligence side and kind of warfighting side, but also into the criminal aspect,
Right.
computer crimes aspect. So when I finished up getting that degree, they sent me back to the Air Force's component to the intelligence community, specifically to advise on cyber and signals issues from a law standpoint. So I got to go really, really deep into the national security side of things, and how we are able to operate, and the privacy considerations and the protection of U.S. persons' information, all that sort of thing from the legal side. I then went on to be the head lawyer for our two operational cyberspace wings, which are the organizations in the Air Force that actually conduct everything from network operations. So how do we maintain, run our networks, to network defense, all the way up to kind of those kind of offensive issues, right? Where we're really directly engaging with other states in cyberspace. So when I finished doing that, they said, hey, you've collected a lot of experience. Why don't you go back and teach on these issues? And so I went to the Naval War College, which is out in Newport, Rhode Island, and I taught there for the last 3 years of my active duty time, focusing in on cyber, but also a little bit of outer space issues, and that intersection between space and cybersecurity. So I wanted to keep teaching. So I retired out of the Air Force from there and came to the Air Force Academy to essentially do the same thing, but at the undergraduate level, but also doing a little bit more on the research side, into kind of emerging technology and cyber issues, to make sure that we're putting the best policies, best equipment into our military as it relates to cybersecurity. And that's where we interacted when I was out here. So I've been out here at the Academy teaching for about 5 years. I teach in both the law and political science departments. I teach, in addition to our cyber law course, I teach a cybersecurity policy course, as well as our international law courses out here. So my primary areas of research thus far have been a little bit more on the international side, and the use of cyber capabilities under the international law paradigm. But as we might discuss, the domestic side and the international side, they come together and mix so frequently, that I don't necessarily see quite as harsh a distinction between the international and domestic side as maybe some people do.
Yeah, and I mean, what's interesting about your career arc is, other than civil litigation, data breach litigation defense, or prosecution from plaintiff side, you really have seen or experienced, all the kind of flavors, right? So as a prosecutor dealing with it, and primarily from a criminal law perspective, with cyber just being the substance, right? And then from a compliance as almost an advisory role, right? When you were in that interim place, we're talking, helping an operational unit figure out how to do it, and then kind of in-house, right? In that last role, before you started teaching, thinking through all those issues, and all in the context, obviously, of the military, but especially in those latter two roles, well, really, and in that first one, right, from a prosecution perspective, really seeing how these issues play out in a way that probably very few people get to do in their careers, because most people either go down litigation or prosecution, or do compliance, although sometimes those overlap.
Yeah, not to make
So,
this a military recruiting video, but one of the
yeah,
interesting things about
yeah.
military networks and cyber in the military is we do run the entire um, gamut, all the way from just network operations, criminal prosecutions, protection and network defense, uh,
Mhm.
intelligence collection, all the way up to offensive cyber operations. We're kind of the only organization that runs the entire scope of advising, which is why being a lawyer in the military on the cyber side is actually pretty interesting because you can get involved in things at a broad perspective that you don't really get anywhere else.
Well, broad perspective and also insight into the the, the tools, tactics, modes of operation. You know, a couple years on the front lines in the military gives you an exposure that you're not, you know, it's going to take much longer time to get, and then help you understand from an advisory perspective. Okay, this is really where this stuff's coming from, the complexities, and also kind of what the FBI is seeing, what domestic law enforcement is seeing, that you won't get direct access to as a civilian. Now, I tell folks both in this program and in the JD program, to the extent you have an opportunity to take on a role in the military, if you can afford it, right? Because often it's not as lucrative as a private sector, and B, don't have the family commitments that might get in the way of doing, taking on that kind of role. Though you can do it with a family. Uh,
And we have lots
there's,
of
I think,
civilian attorneys as well.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the
yeah.
civilian and military attorneys work side by side on all these sorts of things. So.
Right. And so I think there's maybe no better venue to get that kind of experience. I mean, DOJ, FBI, same kind of thing, but maybe less holistic. All right. So with that background, so folks understand where you're coming from, let's talk about your course in particular in this program, and then we'll pull the lens out and talk about the program in general. So we call it cyber law, and that, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a pretty generic description. What do you cover in the cyber law course?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you kind of framed it that way because it is one of the difficult things about teaching is as we all cyber law as a subject, as we all know, the internet and cyberspace affects every aspect of society now, right? There's nothing that is not touched. Well, maybe like wilderness survival training or something, but there's almost nothing that isn't touched by the internet and by cyberspace. And it's challenged our legal understanding of things in so many different areas. And so part of the challenge to teaching this course is just scoping, right? What is it
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to cover? And some things have to get left out. If you tried to cover everything, then you could do nothing but barely hit the wave tops of anything. And so in the version of the course that I'm teaching right now, it's very much security law kind of writ large. So what topics do we not cover, right? Well, we don't really get into intellectual property issues, right? So if you really want to
Mm-hmm.
know about how digital intellectual property as it relates to the music industry or as it relates to media in general, that's not something that we just have the time. Not that there are very interesting legal issues present there, but because we have to scope it somehow. So we really look at the course starts with what are we trying to achieve in cyberspace? What are the values that we want to protect? What are the benefits of cyberspace that we want to protect? Because I'm a firm believer in when we're evaluating the law, we need to keep those factors at the forefront. Because if the law isn't achieving what we want out of cyberspace, if we're not maintaining our national values in cyberspace, then the law isn't getting it right. And we need to want to think about how maybe the law should change in order to get it right. So we start off with that and a little bit of just a technical refresh. I know that there's other courses in the program to get way more into the technical, but what I focus in on is what are those aspects of cyberspace? What are the characteristics that really challenge our understanding the law? And the reason I think that that's important is because most of the time when we're looking at legal issues in cyberspace, we're not looking at law, that's written specifically for cyberspace or the internet. We're looking at applying law that exists generally to the cyber domain. There is an increasing amount of specific cyber law, and we do cover that, but it's still fairly limited. So when we're, for example, when we're looking at criminal investigations in cyberspace and what information law enforcement is allowed to have access to, or what are the procedures that they need to go through, right? So if, let's say you are working at Verizon and the FBI comes to you with a subpoena, what are the requirements that the FBI or law enforcement has to engage in to get certain different types of information from service providers? And there's no specific law that's written for that. We're taking generally applicable law, Fourth Amendment law, or any other existing legislative acts that govern privacy generally, and law enforcement access to that information, and then figuring out how to apply that in cyberspace. So, how would you need to write a warrant for a search warrant for a computer as opposed to a house, right? That's not necessarily intuitive. And when you really dig down into it, the issues become very different, again, because of those different characteristics of cyberspace. The fact that, I can contain almost all of my life's information on a telephone that I can have in my pocket. That's a little bit of a different search issue than, just rifling through my wallet, which I also have in my pocket, because of the sheer amount of information that's available on my phone as opposed to what you might be able to find in my wallet. So we kind of go through those preliminary issues, and then I kind of generally break it up into about 4 different sections. We look at very traditional law enforcement. So we look at what are the issues with criminal jurisdiction in cyberspace. So how do we know what kind of courts should have jurisdiction over cases when the potential effects of a data breach or some other cybercrime are potentially, in every jurisdiction in America might be affected and beyond by that particular crime. How do we figure out who has jurisdiction? What are the particular criminal statutes applicable to cyberspace? So such as the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was our primary anti-hacking statute, which is a federal statute, but almost every state has a very similar statute to the federal statute in terms of the primary, when somebody is hacking, right, into another computer, what type of a crime is that? What do you need to prove? What are the various aspects of that law? And then we get into investigations, right, which is the really difficult part, I think, is how do you conduct an investigation that involves material that's on a computer, that's in the cloud, and what are the different provisions, what are the different legislative acts. We have the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, but again, that was written in 1986. So how do you take a law that was written in 1986 at the very advent of the internet, right? The internet in 2024 looks a lot different than it did in 1986, but yet that's when the law was written. So questions of, well, how do we apply this? And as the technology is constantly changing, how does that change our understanding of the law? As we move from data being resident on devices to being resident on the cloud, and primarily most people access their data through the cloud now, something that doesn't belong to you, it belongs to somebody else. How does that affect your protection over that information? So anyway, so we look at the broad range of issues related to criminal investigation, and then we dip into electronic surveillance and criminal investigation, but from a national security perspective. So when you have a foreign state involved or an agent of a foreign state, how does that change the rules? Because the rules are quite a bit different in that perspective. But yet you're still looking at systems inside the United States or data that might involve United States persons. And those issues get fairly complex. So then from there, we shift more towards the pure cybersecurity front. And we look at some of the different executive orders, the different regulatory mechanisms that relate specifically to cybersecurity. What are we doing and what are the legal requirements in the United States in terms of protecting your data, other people's data, and because that's an area where now we're really starting to cross over into this area of, well, it's a little bit of policy and it's a little bit of law, and it's and it's some of those gray areas in between. What are the requirements when there is a major cyber incident? Who responds to that? How do they respond? What are the limitations? All those sorts of issues, and they're really interesting and they're constantly evolving. And so, but also very important. And then in the final part of the course, we get more into international considerations, because so much of what's going on these days either involves transnational cyber criminal organizations, such as ransomware gangs, but also state actors such as Iran, North Korea, China, Russia. How does that impact how we conduct cybersecurity from a legal perspective? What can we do in response? What are some of the international legal mechanisms available to us to respond to or to try and prevent international criminal cyber activity or state cyber activity? So that's what this course is. One thing I do like to do, though, is we generally have weekly Zoom sessions where we can talk about, hey, I know we don't cover this in the course, but I'm really interested in topic
Yeah.
X. And in future iterations of the course, by the way, we're going to bring a lot more discussion of artificial intelligence, machine learning, some of those other issues, as they're now really emerging as important legal areas, and look at some of the issues there as well. But there are opportunities, because I know that people are often interested in, and this might be their only chance to really discuss some of those other areas that we don't formally get into in the course.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Although what's interesting, and we'll pivot now to the program itself, is what you're doing really builds on and intersects with the core, two of the core requirements. One, Intro to American Law, that I teach, where we're just surveying law. It's a quick overview of both most of the first year topics in a JD program, as well as some upper level ones like con law and ad law. But crim law is in there, and we touch on the CFAA. And then Kirk Harris' course, Privacy Law and Management, which is, again, a survey of the domestic, primarily, laws, as well as some of the major international, not international law, but laws from other jurisdictions, primarily GDPR, and how you comply with those, how you operationalize a compliance program. And he covers CFA, he covers ECPA, but from a different lens, right? He's trying to talk about, well, what do you do when you're in a compliance role or in-house or external counsel role, trying to help an organization develop a program? And yours, again, is talking about all those things, but again, from some different lenses, but lenses that you're going to interact with in any role that you're at. And so, what's nice is it's iterative, so that folks are getting exposure to these laws, and then just the way of thinking about it from a legal perspective, a legal policy perspective, as opposed to a technical perspective, in different ways. So with that kind of setting, from your perspective, you are a lawyer. This program is primarily for non-lawyers, although we do have some lawyers who go through it. What's the benefit of if you're in a compliance role or you're in a technical role, and you're in this field, or you want to get into this field, but you don't want to do the JD, you don't want to be a lawyer in this field. What's the benefit of a program like ours that emphasizes the legal aspects, and really goes quite deep, because we have JD students in your course, in most of the courses that we offer?
Yeah, I think for a long time, people looked at cybersecurity and kind of assumed that it was a technical problem to be solved, right? Well, if only we come up with enough, firewalls and different widgets to hang out on the network, then we can solve this cybersecurity problem. And that was kind of a mentality, I think, that existed for a long time. And I think we're in an age right now, a period where everybody is sort of awakening to, some people already did, but some people and some organizations took longer than others, to where cybersecurity is really a balance between technical issues and what I like to call the organizational story or organizational issues. That, you cannot achieve cybersecurity alone by hiring a purely technical person who says, I'm going to go out and find all the best technical gear to hang on your network that's going to protect you. That's not going to work, right? There are so many other issues that are more legal and policy and kind of holistic issues about how we utilize, how we approach network security, what the intent and purposes of malicious actors in cyberspace are, what they're trying to achieve. I think you have to have an understanding of both, right? And so now you're seeing a lot of CISOs not necessarily being technical individuals, but people who are more big picture, who understand the technical side of things, but then also understand the legal parameters and the other issues and the policy issues about right, achieving that network security writ large. And so, I like to talk about like left and right brain sort of a thing, right? I think the technology, how the internet works, how networking works, are all critical to understanding the legal side of things, or the policy side of things, or the psychological side of things when it comes to network security. If you don't have that grounding, then it really makes it difficult, right? Just because the internet works differently. If you think about the internet and the way that you think about the telephone system, then you're not getting it, right? They're two fundamentally different ways of operating. If you think it's just a point-to-point transition, then the legal issues aren't going to make sense. And so I really think you need to have both sides of it in order to properly do that. And on the legal side, no, you don't need to be a lawyer to advise on these things. And non-lawyers advise on legal related issues all the time, like you said, with compliance issues or whatever else, right? You need to know, well, if I do have a breach, what do I do, right?
Right. Right.
If law enforcement comes to me requesting information, what are my obligations? A lot of people don't know that under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, the obligations aren't necessarily on the law enforcement side. Often they're on the corporate or the industry side that comply. So what are my obligations? What do I need to do? And the really complicated questions usually do go up to legal counsel, but 90% of them don't get up to that level, right? And so everybody needs to have that basic level of understanding on the legal side, but they also need to understand how the system works. And it's changing rapidly, right? We're entering an age now where artificial intelligence is going to take on an increased role in network security. How does that affect our legal understandings? So I think what a program like this is so important for is giving you that broad perspective on these issues instead of just saying, hey, you just need to know the ABCs of networking and how to hook all these things up and how to configure your firewall, right? But if you don't understand the other side of it, then you're only getting half the story and you're going to lose that battle. You're going to lose the cybersecurity battle.
Yeah, and I mean, and as you emphasize, so many of these issues flow, the legal aspect of them flow from laws that were not crafted, drafted to address the current realities, and even those that are. That's just the nature of legal drafting is such that you cannot specify anything, right? So it's still the case that most legal frameworks, the general requirement is reasonable security, and that just requires massive interpretation. And so, as you say, even if there are a set of conventions or policies, either because they're industry wide or they're specific to your organization, it really helps to understand how much play there really is in those joints. And so that when you're making the frontline calls, and especially working with systems that need that kind of flexibility, it's never cut and dried exactly what control you're going to use. I mean, sometimes there are very specific things, but for the most part, it's not that cut and dried. And because it's an evolving set of challenges, and the threat actors are constantly evolving, figuring out what is the right balance, and when you're getting close enough is, it's really more art than science. We had a question in the chat from Kieran Rao. Kieran is a solutions architect inclined to pursue the JD. And I should mention, anyone who's on this call is debating between the MLS and the JD. Big difference is, if you want to practice law, like you want to be a lawyer, then the JD is for you. You definitely want to take that route. It's a generalist degree within which you can pursue our certificate, including taking Prof. Biller's course. But it's a much different lift. If you are interested in the cybersecurity field from a compliance perspective, or you're already in a technology role and you want to, understand this aspect of the job, this is the degree that really gets you almost as adept on the legal side as the JDs will do, because the JDs have to do all their generalist stuff and then do this as electives. But it's not for someone who wants to practice law as a lawyer. And Kieran's question was, most incident management are pretty weak and hardly have any idea until a catastrophic breach happens what legal criteria is needed in incident management and legal remedies. And this is one of the things you get into, right, Jeff?
Yeah.
We're evolving towards having some more. It's prescriptive if you're in certain regulated industries, but it's still fast moving and lots of interpretation. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's one of those. It's a real challenge because it's a balancing act. Because on the one hand, the federal government would like you to report these breaches immediately. They would like to have the information on how it occurred, who's affected. But the reality of any cyber investigation is that you rarely know everything at the beginning, right? It's generally an evolving process. So how deep the breach went, who the malicious actor was, right? Because if it's a criminal organization, then your response is going to be different than if it's a nation state actor. If you come out immediately as an organization and say this is a massive breach, that's going to affect your share price, it's going to affect your company's reputation, and those facts generally aren't available immediately. And so right now what you're seeing is this kind of push-pull back and forth, and this is primarily coming from federal regulators like the FTC, on those requirements for how quickly and what the procedures are for doing that breach notification. And so there's no definitive answer right now. I think they're still trying to figure out what that balance is between reporting, but also and getting the important information that's out there so that people can protect themselves, protect their data, protect their intellectual property, whatever. But compared to, well, we want to actually wait until we know what's going on and how deep this is and who the actor is and what their objectives were before we put out too much information, because that's going to affect our response, and it's also going to affect the industry or the corporation or whoever it may be. And there's not this is primarily done right now through the federal regulatory process, which is much different than a traditional legislative process, right? So it's not like Congress has come out and said, these are the rules. It's been left to the regulators right now. And much of that is, Brian mentioned that reasonableness standard before. We're trying to figure out what's reasonable for breach notification. Is something that kind of needs to play out over time a little bit to figure out exactly where that should lie.
Well, and the FTC doesn't have, well, they have, but it's a very very challenging rulemaking process. So they've essentially done rulemaking by consent decree, and then now we have this interesting phenomenon with kind of, I don't know if it's competition or certainly overlapping regulatory authority, with the SEC entering the fray and now requiring this analysis of materiality as well as a tighter reporting timeline, which competes with the FBI and DHS's interests in trying to promote that cooperation. to allow that bigger picture. So lots of challenging things in the field, and certainly not amenable to sort of black and white rules, right? Because every breach is a little bit different.
And I don't know that we're in a healthy place with it right now, because from what I've heard, oftentimes this ends up going to the general counsel to basically say, hey, we want to be safe from litigation. Should we declare this a breach yet? Or what should we say? What should our timeline be? And so it's one of those where I don't know where cybersecurity best practices are driving the decision, or the best interests of the customers or the clientele, or even the company, except to say
Right.
that they're trying to protect themselves from litigation. And I don't know that that's the healthiest place to be.
Yeah.
To me, the cart driving the horse, as it were.
Yeah, actually, there's a great book that is the central thesis is essentially that Dan Soloff and forgetting the co-author's name, but Breached. And these are law profs who've been in this field for a while, mostly on the privacy side, but they're looking at the data breach reporting. And that one of the theses in the book is, right, we're focused on the wrong point in time. And so we're both often inappropriately punishing the victim, who may or may not have, but sometimes may have had what would generally be characterized as a reasonable security program, but nonetheless, at a minimum, is facing pretty extensive costs on the reporting side, right? Irrespective of whether your program was as good as it could be, you're going to have to report, and that's expensive in and of itself, and might be not and is not the best way to direct resources if we want to really improve cybersecurity. So yeah, no question that both the litigation, the cost of reporting, and then if you're a regulated entity, which everyone is, if you've got consumer data, FTC and state AGs are going to get involved in scrutinizing what you've been doing. I want to pivot. Ray's got a great question. I've been in IT for 25 years, mostly on the networking side, mostly recently a solutions engineer. Currently in the last term of a BS in cybersecurity, looking toward policy compliance side. As far as careers coming out of this program, what sort of career outcomes have you seen for MLS grads? I'll address that generally. I mean, the short answer, Ray, is we've gotten a much more diverse mix of students than I had anticipated in terms of background and career desires. And so we've run the gamut from folks who are already in the field, mainly on the IT side, but a handful on the compliance side, who are taking this degree because they want to learn more, they want to advance their career, especially on the technical side. If you want to take on a strategic role, CISO, or on the senior team, this is particularly valuable in that respect. What we say is we're giving you that 360-degree view. The kind of stuff that you're going to learn in the law policy classes in particular will be helpful throughout a career, from the beginning kind of on up. But in some respects, even more important as you progress into strategic roles where you're going to have to make the calls. You're not implementing policy, but even when you're implementing policy, and you're at the you're sort of at the lower end on a compliance or a technical side, it really helps to understand, because you can then ask intelligent questions and help to position the organization in a way that doesn't merely rely on a set policy, but understands, okay, because it's going to evolve, it's going to have to evolve, and kind of can see those gaps and be proactive in trying to develop solutions there. We've had students who had no technical background move into compliance roles, especially governance, risk, and compliance. That's sort of obviously our sweet spot. But we've got some folks who've gone into technical roles. Now, if you're interested, this is not you, Ray, I understand, because you're already in. You've got deep technical experience, and you're completing a technical bachelor's, or at least on this BS as opposed to BA. If you don't have a technical background, typically you'll need to do something more in terms of getting some certifications to get up to speed if you want a technical role as opposed to a compliance role. And I'll explain the technical courses that we offer and also how we can create alternatives for folks like Ray, who may come in with enough of a technical grounding that you might not need the technical baseline we give you. So Jeff, I spent too long. I was going to hand it off to you, but from your perspective and the students you've interacted with, what are the kinds of roles that you think we're pretty good at?
No, I would just mirror what you said. So it seems kind of that CISO role, again, a role where you need to understand the technical aspects, but it's so much broader than that. It's about the policies and practices of the organization. And these are all resource questions for a company, right? You don't have unlimited resources. And so having that understanding, well, there's certain things that are required that we have to do. There are certain things that we ought to do. What are the most important of those? So that you can, I think if you can have that intelligent conversation with your CEO or whoever about, all right, or providing that advice up to whoever the primary CISO is as you move up through the chain, to have that broad perspective, and not just say, well, we need to spend more money on these technical aspects. To have that broad perspective, I think, is extremely valuable and something that I think they're increasingly looking for. Yeah, I would echo what you're saying.
All right. So any other questions for Prof. Biller? Let me make sure I got them all in the Q&A. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you, Jeff, for taking the time and for doing what you do for us. I know you're not doing it for the money, because I know how much we pay you, but we appreciate that you're willing to share your expertise, with our sets of students in this program, and also the JD students. Really it's a fantastic course. I was so pleased when you came back with the yes answer from the Air Force Academy, because it's hard to, I'll be honest, it's hard to find somebody with your background who's not making a ton of money in the private sector, who has the academic bent, and so is teaching full time. So it's really like we got a free new faculty member, but the Air Force Academy is paying your full freight. So.
Well, teaching is fun. I love it.
It is.
I love the interaction. I wouldn't want to do anything else at this point in my life. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to excuse Jeff, and I'm going to go ahead and reopen the slide deck. Oh wait, there's one more. Oh, there's Emerald. Emerald, great to see you. Emerald's one of our current students who actually took Jeff's course and loved him so much she popped on to hear our discussion. Thanks, Emerald.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everyone who takes Jeff's course, he gets rave reviews on the student reviews. So, all right, Jeff, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and pull up this the slide deck and just walk everybody through a little bit more detail about the program itself and the application process. So this was Ray's question. What's the benefits of this degree? How will it prepare me for a career? And so, as I said, we like to say it's a 360-degree view. We give you a pretty thorough technical grounding, not enough if you don't already have a technical background to really enter as an entry-level technical professional in this field. But if you're a compliance professional, or that's what you're looking for, it really helps give you that more fine-grained understanding, so you can talk to your technical colleagues and really help to collaboratively problem solve around what should my organization be doing. Is what we're doing sensible, reasonable, to use the term of art in the field. And depending what you want to do, well, really, we think what we give you is valuable throughout a career in any side of things. We're a little bit better positioned for someone who has no background in this field to come in and retool to get a job on the compliance side. Compliance really are the professionals who are dealing with law in terms of the implementation of law, but especially those roles like government risk compliance that kind of straddle that technical compliance side. We're also pretty well positioned to get people started into those roles. But we have students who come in from a range of places. We've had chief information security officers in the program who are here to, to get that in-depth understanding. And we've had folks who have no background at all who are interested in getting started. For those folks, we talk with you, make sure you understand what you're getting, and then try to really help you think about what are the roles you might be able to obtain, and then what else you might need to do, especially on the technical side, to get moving in. But really, I can say without hesitation, we're a unique program. There's not another one that's exactly like us. NYU's program is pretty close, but not exactly the same. And the depth of expertise we have in our adjunct faculty, and it's mostly adjuncts in who teach this program, is pretty extraordinary. So Jeff is one example. And actually, I'm going to move now into the curriculum itself and talk about both the courses and some of the faculty we have. So it's a 30-credit program structured as 10 3-credit courses. If you stay with the track, it's 2 courses a semester across 5 semesters, so a year, about a year in time, maybe a little bit more. So our cohorts start in fall and spring, and then if you stay on track in summer, then it's fall, spring, summer, fall, spring. If you start in spring, it's spring, summer, fall, spring, summer. And so across that time, we'll get you through. It's possible we'll work with you if you want to accelerate that a little bit, although we can't guarantee, because we offer these courses in a rotation that brings together the different cohorts. It's possible to accelerate a little bit. It's not easy to do it full time. We just don't have enough asynchronous courses that we can offer that in a sequence that you could get through in 2 semesters, for example. So it's not for someone who has the luxury of going full time and really wants to do that. It's mainly designed for people who are working professionals doing this part-time. It's primarily law and policy focused. So we get you the on-ramp into the law side of things is Introduction to American Law, which you almost always take in your first semester. I teach that course. It is a survey, as I mentioned before, of the major topics you will encounter as a cybersecurity professional, and really covers quickly the stuff you would get as a JD student in your first year, plus some upper levels. It's general with a cybersecurity inflection. I use examples from cybersecurity, but also it gets you understanding how to deal with legal materials, how to read them, how to interpret them, and to some extent, how to do legal analysis yourself. Legal writing is the dovetail intro course there. You don't always get that right in the beginning, but it builds on what you learned in Introduction to American Law. It goes deeper into how to do research, how to consume, and to some extent, how to create legal materials. So how to do legal analysis and how to understand legal analysis, read legal materials in depth. And that's taught by a graduate of CSU Law who has been in incident response for most of her career, first as a large firm lawyer, now in-house with State Farm. She has a lot of experience, and she draws on that experience to talk about it's not taught by a legal writing professor, it's taught by a cybersecurity professional. Then on the technical side, Cybersecurity 1 is the baseline technical course. This is taught by Spence Witten. It's a member of Cyber Ohio along with me. One of the leading professionals in the field, now works for a DC-based cloud security consulting firm, but for a long time worked across the field. Does a great job. He does not have a technical background, but he's a deeply knowledgeable technical expert. His work is deeply technical, so he's a great translator. He's able to explain these concepts to folks without a technical background. And for those without a technical background, it throws you in the deep end a little bit, but he holds your hand quite a bit. We use a set of Kali Linux labs to understand how cybersecurity attacks work. Yeah, as Jeff mentioned, sort of why cybersecurity is a different kind of problem, but really looking at it from a technical perspective. For folks like Ray and some others on this call and others listening, if you already have done a cybersecurity technical degree or a series of certifications, we can talk about whether you need Cybersecurity 1 and then what alternatives we have. So these are the 10 courses we built for the program. They all run the same, they're all on the same platform, but we're a law school and you are a graduate student, you are a law student, not a JD student, but a student in one of our law degrees. And so you're able to take other electives that we offer, and we have a very robust cybersecurity program. You're also welcome to take electives in other colleges. We have an MSIS program that we work closely with. We share a certificate with them. And then also, if you have the technical background, if you have a sufficient technical background, also the computer science graduate courses are available. So we'll work with you if you already have a deep technical background and might not need Cybersecurity 1. Cybersecurity 2 then is more policy than technical, but it's where you learn to create a cybersecurity program, select the specific controls that you might use for an entity like Cleveland State University, a mid-sized public research university where you have overlapping compliance obligations, FERPA, HIPAA. You have to worry about the FTC because you are operating to collect consumer data in various roles. And so thinking through kind of what do you have to do and how might you translate that technically? So a lot of folks with a technical background still do cybersecurity too. Sometimes it's a little bit of a refresher for folks, but and for that matter, a lot of our technical people actually do Cybersecurity 1 as a refresher. We've had CISOs do it. Spence is fantastic, so they enjoy it. And then the last technical course we have is a technical capstone. Spence also created this course. It uses the Ohio Cyber Range and a set of labs that are built there, and it tracks to the Certified Ethical Hacker certification. So it goes a little bit deeper on the technical side. You have to have done Cybersecurity 1 before you take that. So taken together, these three courses do a nice job of going relatively deep, especially for folks with no technical background. For folks with a technical background, sometimes they're a refresher, and sometimes they go a little bit deeper than maybe you've encountered, especially the technical capstone if you haven't done a CEH. If you've done a CEH, again, we can talk to you about alternatives. Then the rest of the courses are all law and policy. Privacy law and management is the survey course I mentioned. Kirk Harith is the lead policy person in the state of Ohio right now. He is the very first cybersecurity strategic advisor to the governor. He sits in the governor's cabinet. He retired from Nationwide Insurance as their chief privacy officer, really got into this field at the very beginning. And is a national leader in the space. So he teaches you what he would want his team to know in terms of generally what these laws are, how they work, and then how do you translate them operationally into a program that inevitably will not be able to dot every I and cross every T. So I helped him build that course. He retired at a time when I was planning to build a course. The adjunct I had hired to build it had not been able to deliver for us. And Kirk asked if he could teach for me, and I said, "Well, if you want to start in 2 weeks, we could build this thing together." And worked out really well. Basically, leveraged Kirk's deep expertise in the space and my long history as a prof. So he teaches it solo now, but you'll see me in the videos. It was a COVID project actually. Corporate compliance 1 and 2 then take the lens back and explain generally how compliance programs work, how cybersecurity and privacy fit within them, and that's where they sit most organizations. I mean, there's an interesting aspect in which obviously cybersecurity and much of privacy are technical in terms of implementation, but they tend to be owned by the compliance entity within an organization. Compliance has its own sort of language and mode of analysis that is based in law, but is a little bit different. So those two courses kind of pull that lens back. HIPAA and privacy, because HIPAA is still in the United States the most comprehensive, extensive federal law that could be changing. And then at the state level, we've got similarly extensive laws. But we go deep into HIPAA and privacy. One, most organizations, regardless of what they do, have a HIPAA obligation. But also by understanding HIPAA, you'll be able to understand really any complex legislative framework. And then cyber law, you just heard about Jeff Biller's fantastic course. So that's the package that we give you. Again, there are other alternatives. Not all of them are 100% asynchronous. Although we're building more asynchronous courses as part of an online JD program that we launched last year. So once you get here, we can talk through what other options there might be. For example, we have a course called Dark Web Criminology that's primarily asynchronous, but the last several weeks require synchronous live attendance. It's built by a woman who was profiled by Forbes as a really well-known white hat hacker, and she teaches about what the dark web is, what the moral and legal issues are, ethical issues are concerning using it, why we have it, why law enforcement hates it, and what law enforcement investigations look like. She has for years trained national and international law enforcement on using the dark web. Okay, questions about the courses in the program. Oh, here's Jack. Can certain courses presumably be taken en route to a JD be waived by practicing attorney? Yes, so Jack, reach out to me directly and we'll talk through. We've had several JDs go through it. Obviously, Intro to American Law and Legal Writing, you won't need. And so we'll find you alternatives just as we would for technical folks. We cannot give credit for anything you've taken towards another degree. So you still have to get 30 credits, but intro and legal writing you wouldn't need. But reach out to me. We'll work with you. We've had others in that position. Other questions about the curriculum? All right, I know I'm running short on time. Let me then quickly, our next cohort starts in fall, so you have time, but we encourage you to apply early so we can work through any of these kinds of questions. August 2nd is the application deadline. Classes start September 3rd, and for this cohort, it'll start September 3rd. Feel free to reach out to that email, and Jack, you can reach me on that email. I see that email and I'll respond directly. But if I don't respond, you'll hear back from, and it's onlinelaw.csuohio.edu right there. Most important thing is get the application in. The essay we use primarily so that we make sure that the program's right for you. And so we'll reach out if we have any questions. We don't, we're not looking for high volume here. We're looking for high quality. We want to make sure that people coming into the program understand what we offer as opposed to other programs, and that you're going to get what you want out of it. So that's what we use the essay for primarily. And then transcripts. You have to have a bachelor's. If you have a 3.0, that makes it easy. We can admit you based on our credential threshold. But if you don't, reach out to us and we'll talk about it. Mainly, we're looking for, if you've got experience, if you've been a successful professional, then we're less worried about your undergraduate GPA. If you're new out of undergrad, then we'll probably ask you to give us a GRE score, or to come back to us in a couple of years when you've demonstrated some progression through an ability to kind of handle the work. Because these courses are challenging. They're the same courses that law students are taking for the most part, and so we want to make sure that they're right for you. Okay, Julie DiBiasio is the director with me of this program. She's the frontline person. She'll handle most questions, and then the substantive stuff she'll pivot to me. Feel free to reach out to her. Again, that same email we both get those emails. So if she doesn't answer, I'll answer, or sometimes she'll tag me and say, hey, can you handle this one? Happy to answer any questions about the application process or about the substance. Okay, any other questions? Then if not, I want to thank you all for joining us. And if you join late, you'll get the recording. You can watch the beginning parts of this, but feel free to reach out with any questions and enjoy your day.